The capture. The battlefield was quiet after the storm of fire and steel. Smoke rose from the ruins of broken ships, and the ground was black with ash. The alien warlord, a tall woman with silver armor and eyes like cold fire, walked among the wreckage. Her soldiers followed her, their boots crushing the remains of what was once a human outpost. She was feared across the galaxy, her name carried in whispers. To her, humans were fragile creatures, easy to bend and break. But today was different because as she searched the ruins, her eyes fell on a single survivor. A human man, bloodied and bruised, yet still standing, his back against the shattered wall. Her soldiers aimed their weapons, waiting for the order to end his life. But she raised her hand and stopped them. There was something strange in his eyes, not fear, not despair, but a quiet fire. It unsettled her for a moment, though she would never admit it. "Bring him to me," she commanded, her voice sharp as a blade. Chains of energy wrapped around the man, forcing him to his knees. Still, he did not beg, he did not cry out. Instead, he looked up at her with steady eyes, as if the chains did not matter. The warlord stepped closer, studying him like a rare beast. "You are mine now, human," she said, her tone filled with pride. "No chain can be broken. No heart can resist me." Her soldiers laughed, certain the man would be broken by nightfall. The human spoke at last, his voice calm but strong. "You can bind my hands, you can chain my body, but you cannot chain the heart." The warlord froze for a breath, not because of the words, but because of the way he said them, as if he believed them completely. She masked her unease with a smile that was more like a threat. "Your heart will learn to obey, as all others have," she said. But inside her, a spark of doubt began to flicker. Why did this weak creature speak as if he carried a strength greater than hers? The soldiers dragged the human through the wreckage, past cages of other captives. The prisoners stared, some with pity, some with awe. The human's gaze met theirs, and in that brief moment, they felt something, hope, small and fragile, yet alive. The fortress of the warlord loomed in the distance, a tower of black stone and burning lights. It was a place where chains sang louder than songs, where screams were common and freedom was a dream. The human was thrown into a cell, the energy bars glowing like fire. The warlord stood outside the cell, her eyes never leaving him. "You will break, human," she said again, her voice low. "I have broken warriors stronger than you, kings, generals, even gods from distant stars." But the man only smiled faintly, his lips cracked, but his spirit unbroken. "Then perhaps," he said, "you have never faced a true human heart." Her soldiers laughed again, mocking his courage. Yet the warlord did not laugh, not this time. She turned away, hiding the strange feeling rising inside her chest. It was not anger, not pride, but something she could not name. That night, as the fortress slept, she dreamed. She dreamed of the human's eyes, calm and steady in the face of chains. She dreamed of a voice whispering through the darkness, telling her that chains were only illusions. When she woke, her fists were clenched, her armor cold against her skin. The human remained in his cell, but his presence began to echo through the halls. Other captives spoke of him. Soldiers whispered about his defiance. The warlord knew it was foolish. He was only one man. And yet, his heart was already planting seeds that no chain could hold. She told herself it was only a matter of time. She told herself he would break like all the others. But deep inside, she wondered if perhaps this human was different. And that thought alone made her restless. The human sat in silence, his chains glowing around his wrists. But in his mind, he was free. He thought of the stars, of the earth he had left behind, of those who still believed in freedom. And he knew, no matter what they did to him, he would never bow. The warlord watched him from afar, her eyes narrowing. She had captured him, enslaved him, yet something felt wrong. For the first time in years, she was not certain who held the true power. The woman with the chains, or the man with the unbroken heart. And so, the story began, not with his defeat, but with her doubt, not with the breaking of a man, but with the awakening of something she had forgotten. Because sometimes the strongest chains are not around the body. They're the ones wrapped around the soul. And sometimes those chains can break, not by strength, not by fire, but by the heart. The silent defiance. The cell was cold, the air thick with the smell of stone and iron. The human sat in the shadows, his wrists bound by glowing chains, his body bruised, but his spirit unbroken. Guards passed by, laughing at his silence, calling him weak, calling him broken already. But he did not speak, and he did not lower his head. The warlord came often to see him, her silver armor gleaming under the firelight of the fortress. She expected him to cry, to beg, to curse her name, but he did none of these things. Instead, when her soldiers struck him, he endured with quiet strength. When they mocked him, he only looked at them with calm eyes. It was not the defiance of rage, but the defiance of peace, and it made her uneasy. One night, when the guards were gone, she stepped closer to his cell. "Human," she said, her voice sharp, "why do you not fight? Why do you not scream?" His reply was steady, his voice soft yet strong. "Because my chains are not on my heart." The words cut deeper than any blade. The warlord turned away quickly, but his voice lingered in her mind like an echo. She remembered the countless slaves she had broken, their spirits shattered in days. Yet this man, with nothing but silence, stood taller than all of them. Among the other captives, whispers began to spread. The human had spoken of the heart. The human had not bent to the chains. In the darkness of their cells, they found courage in his silence. They began to lift their heads, began to believe that perhaps freedom was not only a dream. The warlord noticed the change. Her fortress, once filled with despair, now carried a strange energy. The captives no longer looked at her with fear alone, but with something else, something she had not seen in years, hope. She called for the human to be brought before her throne. Her soldiers dragged him across the black stone floor, his steps heavy, but his back still straight. He knelt before her, chains binding his arms, yet his eyes never left hers. "You stand before power," she said, her voice echoing through the chamber. "You will bow. Human, you will learn your place." But he only smiled faintly, a quiet smile that stirred anger in her chest. "I know my place," he said, "and it is not in chains." The chamber fell silent, her soldiers shifting nervously. Never before had a slave spoken to her like that. Her pride burned, but her heart felt something strange. She wanted to crush him, yet she also wanted to understand him. She dismissed her soldiers and leaned closer, her voice like fire. "What gives you this strength? Human, why do you not fear me?" He looked at her with eyes that seemed older than war. "Because fear is a chain too, and I chose long ago not to wear it." For a moment, she felt as if the ground beneath her was unsteady, as if the man in chains held a freedom she could never touch. That night, she could not sleep. His words haunted her, circling in her mind like shadows she could not escape. Her people believed strength was measured in chains, in obedience, in conquest. But this human carried strength that came from something she had forgotten. The next day, she ordered him tested. He was forced to carry heavy stones, to endure hunger, to face blades and fire. Her soldiers waited for him to collapse, to beg, to surrender. But though his body bent, his spirit did not. At dusk, when he fell to his knees, one soldier struck him. Still, the human lifted his head and whispered, "Is this all you have?" The warlord heard of this and came herself. She looked at him, broken in body, but not in heart. And for the first time in years, she felt powerless. The fortress walls seemed smaller now, the chains weaker. Her pride told her to end him, but something else stopped her. The more she tried to break him, the more she felt herself breaking, not in weakness, but in doubt. The human remained silent most of the time, but in that silence, he spoke louder than any cry. Other slaves began to sing in whispers old songs of their worlds. Even the guards hesitated before striking him. His defiance was no rebellion of swords, but a rebellion of the heart. The warlord stood on her balcony that night, staring into the dark sky. She thought of the stars, thought of the wars she had fought. She had conquered worlds, enslaved kings, destroyed armies. But here, in her own fortress, a single human threatened to undo her rule. Not with weapons, not with armies, but with silence. With courage, with a heart that refused to bow. And she realized with unease that the true battle had only just begun. Cracks in the chains. Days turned into weeks inside the fortress. The human remained in chains, yet his silence spoke louder than the roar of battles outside. The warlord watched him from the shadows, her silver armor gleaming as she stood in the dark halls. Each time she saw him, she felt something unexplainable, something she had not felt in years. The human did not fight the guards when they beat him. He did not cry when they mocked him. Instead, he helped others even in chains, lifting a wounded prisoner, sharing water, whispering courage. The other captives looked to him now, not to her. And for the first time, the warlord felt her control slip like sand through her fingers. Her fortress had been built on fear. Fear was the chain that kept her empire together. But this one human, with no weapons and no army, had begun to break that chain. Not with strength, but with something far more dangerous: hope. One evening, she entered his cell alone. Her soldiers advised against it, but she silenced them with a single glance. Inside, the human sat against the wall, his chains glowing faintly, his eyes calm, as always. "You infect my fortress with whispers," she said, her voice cold. "They believe in you. They follow your silence. Why?" He looked up at her slowly, his face pale with exhaustion, yet still alive with fire. "Because chains cannot silence the heart," he replied. "They see it, even if you pretend not to." The warlord clenched her fists, anger burning inside her chest. But beneath that anger was something she feared even more: doubt. She had ruled for years without question. Her orders were law, her strength unquestioned, her chains unbreakable. Yet now, in her own fortress, she felt her authority weaken. Not because of rebellion, not because of armies, but because of one human's heart. That night she dreamed again. She dreamed of a human's voice, soft but unyielding. "You rule with chains," the voice whispered, "but chains break." In the dream, she saw her empire crumble, not with fire, but with cracks that spread from within. She woke in fury, yet her hands trembled. The cracks grew wider each day. Her soldiers began to question in whispers. The slaves stood taller, their eyes no longer empty. And she knew where it began. The man in chains, the human whose heart refused to bow. To test him, she ordered something cruel. The human was brought into the courtyard, forced to kneel in front of the others. "Watch closely," she said to the captives, her voice sharp. "Watch how your symbol of defiance breaks." She commanded a soldier to strike him again and again. The crowd watched, waiting for the human to scream. But he did not. He only lifted his head and met her eyes. And with blood on his lips, he whispered, "Is this the best you can do?" A murmur spread through the captives. Even the guards hesitated. The warlord's heart pounded with rage, yet also with fear. Why did he not break? Why did he not surrender? She turned away before anyone could see the doubt in her eyes. Later, when the human was returned to his cell, she came to him again. "You will destroy everything," she said bitterly. "Your defiance spreads like a plague." He answered calmly, "It is not defiance, it is freedom. And freedom cannot be chained forever." Those words struck her deeper than any weapon. She had built her life on the belief that chains lasted forever. But his heart was already proving her wrong. And the cracks in her empire's foundation grew louder each day. One soldier dared to question her openly. "Warlord," he said carefully, "perhaps this human should be executed." But she silenced him instantly, her voice trembling though she hid it well. "No," she said, "not yet." She told herself it was strategy, that she wanted to study him longer. But deep inside, she knew the truth. She was not ready to let him go. The fortress felt different now. The slaves whispered of freedom. The soldiers doubted their strength. And the warlord, once unshakable, found herself standing on uncertain ground. All because one human refused to bow. That night she stood at her window, the stars burning above like silent witnesses. She thought of her victories, her conquests, the world she had crushed. None of them haunted her. None of them made her question herself. But this single human did, and she realized with growing fear that perhaps she was not the one holding him in chains. Perhaps it was he who was slowly breaking the chains around her. The human heart. The fortress was never quiet. Chains clattered, guards shouted, prisoners moaned. But in the middle of that noise, the human silence grew louder every day, and the warlord could no longer ignore it. She came to his cell again, her silver armor glowing faintly in the torchlight. He sat with his back against the wall, his eyes half closed from exhaustion. But when she approached, he opened them, calm and steady as always. That look unsettled her more than any weapon could. "You confuse me, human," she said sharply. "You are beaten, starved, mocked, and still you do not break. Why?" He tilted his head slightly, his voice low but firm. "Because strength does not live in chains. It lives in the heart." The words cut through the cold air like a blade. For a moment, the warlord forgot she was the conqueror, forgot she was the master. She felt like a student hearing something she had lost long ago. She clenched her fists and looked away, but the words stayed. When she left, her mind was restless. She remembered her childhood, long before war and conquest. Once, she too had believed in something greater than chains. But power had hardened her, had buried her old self beneath armor and cruelty. The human's defiance was not just defiance. It was a mirror. It showed her what she had become. And though she tried to hate him for it, part of her could not. The next morning, she ordered him into the training yard. Her soldiers gathered, curious, waiting to see what new punishment their warlord had planned. But instead of cruelty, she gave him a weapon. A simple wooden staff, nothing sharp, nothing deadly. "Fight," she ordered. The soldiers laughed, certain the human would fail. He was weak, half-starved and wounded, but when the guards attacked, he did not fight with rage. He fought with calm precision, blocking, evading, never striking to kill. The soldiers grew frustrated. Their strength was greater, their weapons sharper. Yet somehow the human stood his ground. And when the fight ended, he lowered his staff and whispered, "This is not about chains, it is about choice." The warlord stared at him, her pride burning, her heart trembling. Every word he spoke, every act he made, chipped at the wall she had built inside herself. And though she still wore her armor, she felt exposed. As if he saw through her, past the steel and the cruelty, straight into her soul. The prisoners watched from their cells, their eyes wide. They saw not just a man in chains, but a leader, and the spark of hope that had been whispering before now burned brighter. The warlord noticed it, and though it should have angered her, it didn't. Instead, it left her with a strange question. Was she afraid of losing her power, or was she afraid of losing herself? That night, she visited him again, not as a warlord, but as a woman seeking answers. "Why do you speak of the heart as if it is stronger than chains?" she asked. He looked at her quietly, then said, "Because chains end when the metal breaks, but the heart endures even when the body falls." She swallowed hard, her chest tight. His words reminded her of a time when she had once believed in honor, in truth, in freedom. She had buried it, convinced herself chains were stronger. But this human was tearing open wounds she thought were healed. The following days, she found excuses to see him more often. Sometimes she spoke, sometimes she only watched him. The more she looked, the more she realized something terrifying. The chains were still on his wrists, but they were no longer holding him. They were holding her. Her soldiers began to whisper behind her back. Some said she was weakening. Others said the human had bewitched her. But deep inside, she knew the truth. He had not bewitched her. He had reminded her of the part of herself that still longed to be free. The cracks in her empire widened. The guards no longer laughed as easily. The prisoners no longer bent their heads. Every day the human lived. Every word he spoke made her fortress feel less like hers. And yet, she did not order his death, because she knew, if he died, the truth he carried would still remain. One night, standing outside his cell, she whispered without meaning to, "What are you doing to me, human?" He met her gaze, his voice calm. "Nothing, warlord. It is your own heart speaking." And for the first time in her life, she felt the chain she had forged for herself begin to crack. The rebellion. The fortress was changing. At first, it was only whispers, small words passed between prisoners in the dark. Then it became glances of courage, quiet songs hummed under breath. And soon, it was something the warlord could not ignore. The human had planted something no soldier could kill. Hope. Every step he took, every word he spoke, even his silence, spread like fire. The chains still bound his wrists, but his spirit had broken free. And now, that spirit was spreading to others. The warlord stood on her balcony, watching her empire. The banners still waved, the guards still patrolled. But something felt weaker. It was not her enemies outside that threatened her, but the voices rising inside. Her advisors warned her. The human must be executed, they said. He is poison. He is breaking the will of the slaves. But she hesitated. She told herself it was strategy, that she needed to study him more. But deep inside, she knew the truth. She could not bring herself to kill him. One night, she walked through the prison halls. The guards bowed. The captives lowered their eyes, but not all. Some dared to meet her gaze, their eyes burning with quiet strength. She knew where it came from, and it unsettled her. In the courtyard, the human was forced to work, carrying heavy stones. His body staggered, yet he did not stop. When another captive fell, he lifted the stone for them, even with his own chains. The others watched in silence, their hearts stirring. And the warlord, standing above, felt her chest tighten. The rebellion did not begin with swords. It began with courage. A woman captive whispered to another, "If he can endure, so can we." A soldier struck a slave, and the slave did not cry, but stared back in silence. It was small, fragile, but it was growing. The warlord summoned the human once more. "Do you know what you have done?" she demanded. "You spread defiance through my fortress. You turned my people against me." But the man only shook his head. "I spread nothing," he said. "I only remind them what already lives inside." Her rage burned, but her heart shook, for she knew his words were true. She had built her power on chains, but the heart could not be chained forever. That night, the first open act of rebellion came. A guard ordered a prisoner to kneel, but the prisoner refused. The guard struck him down, yet another rose in his place. The whisper of courage was becoming a voice. The warlord's soldiers grew restless. Some feared her wrath. Others feared the human spirit more. And in the silence of her chambers, the warlord asked herself a question she had never dared. Was her empire of chains already lost, not by battle, but by the human heart? The next day, she called the human to her throne. Her soldiers stood ready. Prisoners watched from the shadows. "You leave me no choice," she said, her voice heavy. "My empire demands your death." The hall went silent. The human lifted his head, his eyes steady. "If you kill me," he said softly, "you will not kill the truth." Her hand trembled on the hilt of her blade. Her soldiers waited. The prisoners held their breath. But she could not strike, not because of weakness, but because in that moment she saw clearly, if she killed him, she would kill the only part of herself that still remembered freedom. She lowered her weapon slowly. Her soldiers stared in shock. The human remained chained, but in that moment, everyone saw where the true power lay. Not in her throne, not in her soldiers, but in him, and in the hearts he had already awakened. The rebellion had begun, not with fire, not with war, but with the breaking of fear. And though the chains still rattled in her fortress, the warlord knew it was only a matter of time before they shattered completely. Chains break. The council of warlords gathered in the great chamber. Their armor clashed, their voices thundered, their anger burned like fire. The human must die, they shouted. He spreads weakness, he poisons the slaves, he corrupts even the soldiers. The warlord sat on her throne, silent, her eyes cold, but her heart restless. She had ruled with chains, but now the chains felt heavy around her own spirit. Her empire demanded blood, demanded the human's execution. Yet the thought of ending him felt like ending something greater. At dawn, the courtyard filled. Prisoners were dragged from their cells. Soldiers formed ranks. Banners burned in the wind. In the center stood the human, his wrists bound, his face pale, but his eyes steady. He looked at the crowd, not with fear, but with calm acceptance. And that calmness spread like fire through every heart watching. The warlord stepped forward, her silver armor shining beneath the morning sun. She raised her blade high, her voice echoing across the stone walls. Today the human will pay for his defiance, she declared. But even as the words left her lips, they tasted like ash. The prisoners stood taller, their whispers growing into murmurs. The soldiers shifted uneasily, many refusing to meet her gaze. They had seen him endure pain without breaking. They had seen his silence give courage. And now, with death before him, they saw not a slave, but a leader. The warlord's blade hovered in the air. Her hand trembled though she tried to steady it. She remembered his words. Chains could bind the body, but never the heart. And in that moment, she understood. If she killed him, she would not destroy rebellion. She would give it a martyr. The human lifted his head and looked at her, his eyes steady. "You hold the sword," he said softly, "but not the power." Her breath caught. The chambers seemed to freeze. Even her soldiers leaned forward, waiting. With a sharp cry, she brought the blade down. Not upon him, but upon the chains. The shackles shattered, the metal clattered against the stone, and the courtyard erupted in gasps. The human stood free, the broken chains at his feet. The prisoners shouted in disbelief. The soldiers faltered in confusion. The warlord lowered her blade, her chest rising and falling. She had not destroyed him. She had destroyed her own chains. The council roared in outrage. "You betray us," they cried. "You betray the empire." But their voices no longer shook her. For the first time in years, she felt the weight lift from her soul. The human looked at her, his expression calm. He did not thank her. He did not kneel. He only said, "Now you see," and she did. The fortress cracked that day, not in stone, but in spirit. The prisoners rose, no longer afraid. The soldiers hesitated, many dropping their weapons. The council tried to command, but their voices were drowned out by the roar of hearts breaking free. The warlord stood between her council and her people, her blade still in her hand. She had once ruled with chains, but now she saw a different path. It terrified her, yet also set her free. Because in choosing to break his chains, she had broken her own. The human stepped into the crowd, his presence like a storm of light in a world of shadows. The prisoners reached for him. The soldiers parted for him. He was no longer just a man. He was a symbol, a heart that no empire could bind. And the warlord, standing above, whispered to herself, "This is the end of my empire of chains." But deep inside, she knew it was also the beginning of something greater. The council fled in anger, their power crumbling. The fortress walls still stood, but its foundation had cracked beyond repair. And all because one human's heart had refused to bow. The new bond. The fortress no longer echoed with the sound of chains. Where once there had been silence filled with fear, now there was silence filled with wonder. The prisoners stood free. The soldiers lowered their weapons. The banners of conquest swayed in the uncertain wind. And in the center of it all stood the human, unbound at last. The warlord watched him, her blade still in her hand, her heart heavy yet strangely light. She had ruled with strength, with fear, with chains, but in one moment she had undone it all. The council had fled, the empire trembled, but for the first time she did not feel like she had lost. For the first time, she felt as if she had been freed. The human walked toward her slowly, his steps calm. Every eye turned to watch, soldiers, prisoners, even the walls seemed to listen. He stopped in front of her, close enough for her to see the blood still on his skin. Yet his eyes were steady, warm, unbroken. "You broke my chains," he said softly. "But it was never about me, it was about you." Her breath caught, the truth heavy on her chest. All this time, she thought she was the master, but she had been the one enslaved. Enslaved by her own pride, her own empire, her own hunger for control. "I do not understand you," she whispered, her voice trembling. "You should hate me. You should want revenge." But the human shook his head. "Revenge is just another chain. I want freedom, not more shackles." His words sank into her like light into darkness. The crowd watched in silence, waiting for what would come next. The warlord lowered her blade, the steel ringing softly as it touched the stone. And in that sound, it felt like centuries of chains breaking all at once. The prisoners began to cheer, their voices rising like thunder. The soldiers stood frozen, torn between old loyalty and new truth. But even they felt it. Something greater than fear was moving through the air, something they could no longer deny. The human turned to the crowd, his voice calm, but carrying like a storm. "Chains are not the end. Freedom begins in the heart," he said. "And no empire, no ruler, no prison can ever take that away." The crowd roared in answer, the sound shaking the very walls. The warlord felt her knees weaken, not from shame, but from release. She had carried her empire like armor, but it had been a prison too. Now, as the voices of her people rose in freedom, she felt the weight lift. She was no longer the master of chains. She was simply another soul learning to be free. When the noise faded, she looked at the human again. "What now?" she asked quietly. He met her gaze without hesitation. "Now we rebuild, not with chains, but with trust." The idea seemed impossible, yet the truth of it burned in her heart. For years, she had conquered, enslaved, destroyed. But now, she saw a future she had never imagined. A future not built on fear, but on the strength of the human heart. The two of them stood side by side, the warlord and the human, master and slave no longer. The people looked to them, uncertain but hopeful. And in that moment, a bond was forged, not of iron, not of chains, but of choice. A bond stronger than any prison. The fortress gates opened. The prisoners walked free into the rising sun. The soldiers followed, no longer guards, no longer masters, simply men and women finding a new path. The warlord took one last look at the chains on the ground, and then turned her back on them forever. As they stepped into the light, the human spoke once more. "Every empire falls, every chain breaks, but the heart endures." She nodded, her eyes soft for the first time in years. And together, they walked forward, not as conqueror and captive, but as equals. The galaxy would remember her as a warlord, a tyrant, a master of chains. But the galaxy would also remember that one day, she chose to break them. And the galaxy would remember the human whose heart turned chains to dust. Because sometimes, the greatest victories are not won by war. They are won by the courage to set each other free.